Welcome to the Saving History podcast, the sanctuary for castle devotees and medieval history enthusiasts. Prepare to embark on a thrilling voyage through time as we unveil enthralling history and legend. From ancient folklore to cutting-edge restoration, we've got it all covered. So grab your headphones and let's dive right in.
The origins of knighthood are rooted deeply in the turbulent soil of the early medieval period, a time when Europe was a patchwork of warring tribes and nascent kingdoms. To truly understand the birth of the knight, we must journey back to the 8th century during the reign of the Carolingian Empire, where the seeds of this martial institution were first sown. In the early 700s, the Frankish kingdom was under constant threat from external forces. One of the most formidable of these threats came from the Moors, who had crossed the Pyrenees and were advancing into the heart of Europe. It was during this perilous time that Charles Martel, the mayor of the palace and de facto ruler of the Franks, rose to prominence. His name, Martel, meaning the hammer, would become synonymous with his indomitable spirit and military prowess. The story of the Battle of Tours in 732 is often regarded as the defining moment for the rise of knighthood. On a chilly October morning, the Frankish and Moorish armies faced each other on the battlefield near the city of Tours in present-day France. The Moorish forces, led by Abdul Rahman al-Ghafiqi, were confident in their ability to overrun the Frankish defenders. They had swept through Spain with relative ease and believed this encounter would be no different. However, Charles Martel had meticulously prepared his troops, comprising both infantry and the emerging class of heavy cavalry. This was a new type of soldier, one who fought not merely on foot but astride powerful war horses, clad in mail armour that could deflect sword and arrow alike. These mounted warriors were the precursors to the knights of later centuries. As the battle commenced, the Moorish cavalry charged, expecting to break the Frankish lines with their sheer momentum. But the Frankish soldiers, under Martel's strategic command, held their ground. Martel had positioned his forces on high ground, using the terrain to their advantage. The Moorish cavalry found themselves unable to gain the necessary speed for a decisive charge. Then, in a moment of calculated brilliance, Martel unleashed his own cavalry. The sight of these armoured horsemen, glinting in the sun as they thundered down the hillside, must have been both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The Frankish cavalry crashed into the Moorish flanks, their lances piercing through enemy ranks, their swords cleaving through the chaos of battle. The Battle of Tours was a decisive victory for Charles Martel and the Franks. Abdul Rahman al-Ghafiqi was killed, and the Moorish forces were driven back across the Pyrenees. This victory was more than just a military triumph. It was a turning point that signalled the rise of a new type of warrior. The success of the heavy cavalry at Tours highlighted the effectiveness of mounted soldiers in battle, paving the way for the evolution of the medieval knight. In the aftermath of Tours, Charles Martel continued to consolidate his power, rewarding his most loyal and capable warriors with land grants known as benefices. These lands provided the resources needed to maintain the expensive equipment and horses required for heavy cavalry service. In return, these warriors pledged their loyalty and military service to Martel and his successors. This reciprocal relationship between lord and vassal became a cornerstone of feudal society, with the knight at its heart. The early knights were not yet bound by the codes of chivalry that would later define their image. They were, first and foremost, warriors whose primary function was to fight and protect the interests of their lords. Their training was rigorous, focusing on skills in horsemanship, swordsmanship, and the use of various weapons. A young nobleman aspiring to knighthood would often begin his training as a page, learning the basics of courtly manners and combat, before advancing to the rank of squire, where he would serve an experienced knight and hone his martial skill. The birth of knighthood was thus a product of necessity and innovation, born from the crucible of conflict and shaped by the demands of warfare. It was a period of transformation, where the brutal realities of battle forged a new class of warrior, one whose legacy would endure for centuries to come. As the medieval period progressed, the image of the knight began to evolve from that of a mere warrior to a figure of moral and social ideals. This transformation was significantly influenced by the development of the chivalric code in the 11th and 12th centuries, a set of ethical guidelines that sought to shape the behavior and responsibilities of knights both on and off the battlefield. The roots of chivalry can be traced back to the combined influence of the church, literature, and the social structures of feudal Europe. The church played a pivotal role in promoting the ideals of chivalry. During a time when violence and lawlessness were rampant, the church sought to impose a sense of order and morality. The Peace and Truce of God movements were instrumental in this endeavour. The Peace of God, initiated in the late 10th century, aimed to protect non-combatants such as peasants, clergy, and merchants from the ravages of feudal warfare. The Truce of God, introduced in the 11th century, sought to limit the days on which combat could occur, prohibiting fighting on Sundays and other holy days. Imagine a scene in a grand cathedral, its stone walls echoing with the solemn hymns of the choir. A young knight, clad in a simple tunic, kneels before the altar, his head bowed in reverence. The bishop, adorned in his resplendent vestments, anoints the knight's forehead with holy oil, blessing him in the name of God. The knight swears an oath to uphold the principles of the peace and truce of God, pledging to protect the innocent and honour the sanctity of holy days. This ceremony, known as the accolade, was a profound moment, imbuing the knight's martial role with a spiritual dimension. Literature also played a crucial role in shaping the chivalric ideal. The epic poems and romances of the medieval period celebrated the virtues of bravery, courtesy, honour, and respect for women. The tales of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, popularized by writers such as Geoffrey of Monmouth and Chrétien de Troyes, painted a vivid picture of knights as noble heroes engaged in quests for justice and honor. These stories captivated the imaginations of both the nobility and the common people, setting a standard for knightly behavior that transcended mere martial prowess. One of the most influential figures in the promotion of chivalric values was Ella of Aquitaine, queen consort of both France and England in the 12th century. A patron of the arts, Eleanor championed the concept of courtly love, a refined and idealized form of love that emphasized the knight's devotion to a noble lady. Courtly love was characterized by acts of gallantry, poetic expression, and unwavering loyalty. Under Eleanor's influence, the courts of Europe became centres of cultural and intellectual exchange, where knights and nobles engaged in tournaments, recited poetry, and performed acts of chivalry to win the favour of their ladies. Imagine a grand hall filled with the flickering light of torches and the murmurs of an expectant audience. The air is thick with anticipation as two knights, clad in shining armour, prepare to joust. Each knight carries the favour of his chosen lady, a delicate token such as a silk scarf or a ribbon, tied to his lance. The signal is given, and the knights charge at each other, their lances poised. The clash is both violent and spectacular, a testament to their skill and bravery. The victor dismounts and kneels before his lady, presenting her with the token of his victory, a gesture of his unwavering devotion. Despite these lofty ideals, the reality of knightly behaviour often fell short of the chivalric code. The brutal nature of medieval warfare and the harshness of feudal life meant that knights were frequently engaged in acts of violence and oppression. The chivalric code was, in many ways, an aspirational ideal, a standard to strive for rather than a reflection of everyday conduct. However, the influence of chivalry did have a tangible impact, encouraging knights to temper their aggression with compassion and to seek honour through righteous deeds. The code of chivalry was a complex and multifaceted construct that sought to elevate the role of the knight beyond that of a mere warrior. It was an amalgamation of religious doctrine, literary inspiration, and social expectation, striving to create a class of noble and honourable warriors. The Crusades were a series of religious wars that profoundly shaped the medieval world and the role of knights within it. Spanning from 1096 to 1291, these conflicts were a crucible where the ideals of chivalry and the brutal realities of warfare collided. To understand the true nature of medieval knights during the Crusades, we must delve into the motivations, experiences, and actions of these warriors who journeyed to the Holy Land. In 1095, Pope Urban II delivered a speech at the Council of Clermont that would ignite the flame of the First Crusade. He called upon the knights of Christendom to take up arms and reclaim Jerusalem from Muslim control. Urban's appeal was both spiritual and pragmatic. It promised spiritual rewards, including the remission of sins, and offered an outlet for the violent energies of Europe's warrior class. For many knights, the Crusades were seen as a divine mission, a chance to serve God through martial valor. Picture a bustling medieval town square filled with the noise of clanging blacksmiths and the chatter of excited townsfolk. A knight, clad in chainmail, stands on a wooden platform listening intently to a travelling preacher who relays the Pope's call to arms. The knight's heart swells with a mix of piety and adventure. He envisions himself as a holy warrior, destined to liberate the sacred city of Jerusalem and earn eternal glory. The journey to the Holy Land was arduous and perilous. Many knights sold or mortgaged their lands to fund their expedition, demonstrating their commitment to the cause. The First Crusade was marked by a series of grueling marches, fierce battles, and harrowing sieges. One of the most dramatic moments came at the siege of Antioch in 1098. The Crusaders, after enduring months of starvation and disease, miraculously captured the city. However, they soon found themselves besieged by a larger Muslim army. Imagine the desperate scene within the walls of Antioch. Emaciated knights, their armour hanging loosely on their gaunt frames, fervently praying for divine intervention. According to chroniclers, a priest named Peter Bartholomew claimed to have received a vision revealing the location of the Holy Lance, the spear that pierced Christ's side. The discovery of this relic boosted the Crusaders' morale, and they launched a desperate sortie against the besieging forces. Against overwhelming odds, they emerged victorious, a victory attributed to divine favour. The culmination of the First Crusade was the siege of Jerusalem in 1099. The Crusaders, fueled by religious fervour and the promise of eternal salvation, stormed the city with relentless determination. The scene that followed was both triumphant and tragic. Chronicles describe the streets of Jerusalem running with blood as the Crusaders slaughtered the city's Muslim and Jewish inhabitants. This act of brutality starkly contrasted with the chivalric ideals that many knights professed to uphold. Visualize the chaotic and brutal storming of Jerusalem. Knights, their faces smeared with sweat and grime, pushing through the narrow streets, swords flashing in the sunlight. Their battle cries mix with the screams of the city's defenders and inhabitants. The air is thick with smoke and the stench of death. In the midst of this carnage, some knights paused to pray at the Holy Sepulchre, their bloody hands clasped in pious devotion. The Crusades also saw the formation of military orders, such as the Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitaller. These orders combined monastic discipline with martial prowess, embodying the dual nature of the knightly ideal. The Templars, founded in the early 12th century, took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, while also committing themselves to the defence of pilgrims and the Holy Land. Their distinctive white mantles, emblazoned with a red cross, became a symbol of their sacred mission. Imagine a Templar knight kneeling in a candle-lit chapel, surrounded by his brethren. He takes his vows, dedicating his life to the service of God and the protection of the faithful. The chapel echoes with the solemn chants of the monks, creating an atmosphere of reverence and resolve. This fusion of religious devotion and martial duty exemplifies the complex nature of knighthood during the Crusades. Despite the high ideals, the Crusades were often marked by moral ambiguity and human frailty. The Fourth Crusade, which culminated in the sack of Constantinople in 1204, is a stark example. Intended to reclaim Jerusalem, this crusade was diverted to the Christian city of Constantinople, resulting in one of the most notorious episodes of betrayal and greed in medieval history. Visualize the fall of Constantinople, the gleaming domes and minarets of the city now engulfed in flames. Knights, driven by avarice rather than piety, loot the churches and palaces, their arms laden with gold and precious relics. The betrayal of fellow Christians leaves a stain on the legacy of the crusading movement. The Crusades were a defining chapter in the history of medieval knighthood. They were a complex tapestry woven from the threads of piety, bravery, brutality, and betrayal. The knights who participated in these holy wars were shaped by their time, embodying both the noble ideals and the harsh realities of their age. As we look back on their legacy, we are reminded that history is rarely black and white, but rather a spectrum of human experience. In the medieval era, the image of the knight was not solely defined by battlefields and crusades. Equally significant were the tournaments and the culture of courtly love that flourished in the 12th and 13th centuries. These elements added a layer of romanticism and spectacle to the knightly life, creating an intricate dance between martial prowess and refined gallantry. Tournaments emerged as both training grounds for knights and grand public spectacles. They provided knights with the opportunity to hone their combat skills in a controlled environment, preparing them for the chaos of real battle. But tournaments were also elaborate festivals that drew crowds from near and far, showcasing the pageantry and pomp of the medieval aristocracy. Imagine the scene, a sprawling field bordered by colourful pavilions, each adorned with the banners and heraldry of participating knights. The air is alive with anticipation as trumpets sound and the crowd roars. Knights, resplendent in their gleaming armour and mounted on powerful steeds, await their turn to prove their mettle. The atmosphere is electric, with the mingling scents of freshly trampled grass and the sweat of men and horses. One of the most famous tournament champions was William Marshall, often regarded as the greatest knight of his age. Born around 1146, William's life was a testament to the ideals of knighthood. He began his career as a landless younger son, entering the service of a noble lord. His rise to prominence was marked by his extraordinary skill in tournaments, where he earned both wealth and reputation. Picture William Marshall at the height of his prowess, charging down the lists with lance poised. His eyes are fixed on his opponent, every muscle tense with concentration. The impact is bone-jarring as lances splinter and horses rear. William emerges victorious, dismounting to the cheers of the crowd. He approaches the lady whose favour he bears, a token of silk tied to his lance, and presents her with the prize of his victory, a gesture of both respect and romantic devotion. Courtly love was an essential component of the chivalric ideal, emphasizing the knight's duty to honour and serve a noble lady. This concept, popularized by the troubadours and poets of the time, celebrated an idealized form of love that was often unattainable and purely platonic. The lady, usually of higher social standing, was both an inspiration and a moral guide for the knight. Eleanor of Aquitaine, queen consort of both France and England, was a pivotal figure in the promotion of courtly love. A patron of the arts and a formidable political force, Eleanor's courts became centres of culture and sophistication. She surrounded herself with poets and troubadours who extolled the virtues of chivalry and courtly love, shaping the social norms of the aristocracy. Envision a grand hall, illuminated by the soft glow of torches and candles. The air is filled with the melodious strains of a lute as a troubadour sings a ballad of unrequited love. Knights and ladies, dressed in their finest garments, listen intently, their faces reflecting the emotions of the tale. A knight, inspired by the song, gazes across the hall at his lady, his heart swelling with both admiration and longing. The practice of courtly love often involved elaborate rituals and gestures. Knights would perform acts of bravery and gallantry in honor of their ladies, seeking to prove their worthiness. These acts could range from composing poetry and songs to undertaking perilous quests. The lady in turn would offer her favor, a token such as a ribbon or a scarf that the knight would wear into battle or tournament. However, the ideals of courtly love were not without their complexities and contradictions. While it celebrated noble intentions and refined manners, it also existed within a highly stratified and often patriarchal society. The lady was often an idealized figure, placed on a pedestal, yet her real power and agency were limited by the social norms of the time. Tournaments and courtly love thus represented a world where the martial and the romantic intertwined. They were arenas where knights could display their valor and chivalry, but also settings where the tensions and contradictions of medieval society were played out. The pageantry of tournaments provided a spectacle that celebrated the physical prowess and courage of knights, while the culture of courtly love elevated the ideals of honor, respect, and devotion. Yet, beneath the surface of these noble pursuits, there were often undercurrents of rivalry, jealousy, and even violence. Tournaments could be deadly, with knights sustaining serious injuries or even losing their lives in the quest for glory. The pursuit of courtly love, while often idealized, could lead to real conflicts and complications, especially when passions ran high. The world of tournaments and courtly love added depth and nuance to the image of the medieval knight. It was a world of contrast and complexity, where the ideals of chivalry were celebrated through both grand public spectacles and the intimate, often secretive expression of romantic devotion. This blend of martial skill and refined sentiment helped to create the enduring legacy of knighthood that continues to captivate our imaginations today. While the image of the medieval knight is often shrouded in the ideals of chivalry and honor, there exists a shadowy side to knighthood that reveals the more brutal and lawless aspects of these warriors. The reality of medieval life was harsh, and the same knights who swore to protect the weak and uphold justice were sometimes the very agents of violence and oppression. In the early medieval period, the lines between knights and common bandits were often blurred. The feudal system, with its intricate web of allegiances and rivalries, created an environment where power struggles and territorial disputes were commonplace. Knights, armed and trained for battle, were sometimes tempted to use their martial skills for personal gain rather than noble causes. One of the most notorious figures exemplifying the darker side of knighthood was Eustace the monk. Born in the late 12th century in the county of Boulogne, Eustace began his career as a monk, but soon turned to a life of crime. Disenchanted with monastic life, he became a mercenary and eventually a feared pirate, terrorizing the English Channel and the coasts of France and England. Imagine the stormy waters of the English Channel, shrouded in mist and the scent of salt. Out of the fog emerges a sleek, dark ship, its sails billowing in the wind. At the helm stands Eustace, a figure cloaked in black, his eyes scanning the horizon for unsuspecting vessels. The peaceful silence is shattered by the sound of his men boarding a merchant ship, swords drawn, and the cries of the crew as they are overpowered. Eustace's exploits were legendary. He was known for his cunning and ruthlessness, often playing both sides in the conflicts between England and France. His most famous act of treachery occurred in 1217 during the Battle of Sandwich. Eustace, then in the service of the French, commanded a fleet against the English navy, However, the English, led by the savvy Hubert de Burgh, managed to outmaneuver and defeat the French fleet. Eustace was captured and executed, his head displayed as a grim warning to others. The existence of such figures highlights the duality of knighthood in the medieval period. While the ideals of chivalry promoted honour and virtue, the reality was that many knights were opportunistic and driven by personal ambition. The same skills that made them formidable warriors also made them dangerous adversaries when their loyalty wavered. Beyond individual acts of piracy and banditry, knights often played a role in the violent enforcement of feudal authority. Lords would employ knights to collect taxes, enforce laws, and suppress rebellions. This often led to brutal crackdowns on peasants and serfs, who suffered under the heavy hand of their feudal masters. Visualize a small village nestled in the rolling hills of medieval Europe. The villagers, simple farmers, and craftsmen toil under the watchful eyes of their lord's knights. One day, a tax collector arrives, escorted by a group of stern-faced knights. The villagers plead for mercy, unable to meet the exorbitant demands. Their cries fall on deaf ears as the knights, bound by their duty to their lord, ruthlessly seize what little they have, leaving behind a trail of despair and resentment. The brutal reality of knighthood extended to the battlefield as well. Medieval warfare was characterized by its savagery, and knights were often at the forefront of this violence. The concept of total war, where civilian populations were targeted, was not uncommon. Castles and towns were besieged, and the defenders, along with innocent inhabitants, were subjected to starvation, disease, and massacre. The siege of Béziers in 1209 during the Albigensian Crusade is a stark example. The Crusaders, led by Simon de Montfort, laid siege to the town, which was a stronghold of the Cathar heresy. When the town fell, the Crusaders slaughtered the inhabitants indiscriminately. According to legend, when asked how to distinguish between the heretics and the faithful, a papal legate allegedly replied, "Kill them all, God will know his own." Picture the grim scene as the walls of Béziers are breached. Knights, their armour splattered with blood and dust, move through the narrow streets, swords flashing in the dim light. The air is filled with smoke and the cries of the dying. The streets run red with blood as the ideals of chivalry are drowned in the harsh reality of medieval warfare. Despite these dark aspects, it is essential to recognize that not all knights succumbed to brutality and lawlessness. Many genuinely strove to uphold the chivalric code, seeking to balance their martial duties with the principles of honor and justice. However, the existence of figures like Eustace the monk and the events of brutal sieges remind us that the reality of knighthood was far more complex and multifaceted than the romanticized image often portrayed. The dark side of knighthood reveals the stark contrasts and contradictions within the medieval warrior class. While chivalry and honor were ideals to aspire to, the brutal and lawless actions of some knights highlight the human frailty and moral ambiguity that existed within this esteemed institution. As we explore the legacy of medieval knights, we must acknowledge both their noble aspirations and their capacity for violence and oppression, painting a complete picture of their role in history. The medieval period saw the emergence of knightly orders, organizations that combined religious devotion with martial prowess. Among the most renowned of these were the Knights Templar, the Knights Hospitaller, and the Teutonic Knights. These orders were founded with the dual purpose of protecting Christian pilgrims and defending the Holy Land from Muslim forces. Their members took vows similar to those of monks, pledging chastity, poverty, and obedience. Yet they were also warriors, trained and equipped for battle. The Knights Templar, founded in 1119 by Hugues de Payens and 8 other knights, were among the earliest and most famous of these orders. Their initial mission was to protect pilgrims travelling to Jerusalem. The Templars quickly gained support from the Church and European nobility, who donated land, money, and recruits. The Order's distinctive white mantles, adorned with a red cross, became a symbol of their sacred mission. Imagine a solemn ceremony in a dimly lit chapel, deep within the fortified walls of a Templar commandery. The flickering candlelight casts long shadows on the stone walls as the new recruits kneel before the Grand Master. Clad in simple robes, they recite their vows, dedicating their lives to the service of God and the protection of the faithful. The Grand Master places the white mantle over their shoulders, the red cross blazing brightly in the candlelight, signifying their new identity as Templar Knights. The Templars' involvement in the Crusades was significant. They participated in major battles and fortified key locations in the Holy Land. Their castles, such as Crac des Chevaliers and the fortress at Acre, were marvels of military architecture designed to withstand prolonged sieges. The Templars' discipline and strategic acumen made them formidable opponents on the battlefield. However, their growing power and wealth eventually led to their downfall. In 1307, King Philip IV of France, deeply indebted to the Templars, orchestrated a campaign to arrest and disband the order. He accused them of heresy, blasphemy, and other grave sins. Many Templars were tortured and forced to confess to these charges. The last Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, was burned at the stake in 1314, maintaining his innocence to the end. Picture the tragic scene as Jacques de Molay stands defiantly before the pyre. His voice, resolute and unwavering, proclaims the Templars' innocence as the flames begin to rise. The gathered crowd watches in silence, the crackling fire reflecting in their eyes, marking the end of one of the most powerful knightly orders in history. The Knights Hospitaller, established around 1099, began as a hospital in Jerusalem to care for sick and wounded pilgrims. Over time, they took on a military role, becoming known as the Order of St. John of Jerusalem. Like the Templars, the Hospitallers wore distinctive attire, black mantles adorned with a white cross. Their dual mission of providing medical care and military defense made them unique among the knightly orders. Visualize a hospitaller infirmary, a vast hall filled with the sick and wounded. The scent of herbs and ointments mingles with the groans of patients as hospitaller knights, dressed in simple black robes, move among the beds, administering aid. Despite their martial training, these knights embody compassion and service, tending to both body and spirit. The Hospitaller's military prowess was demonstrated during the Siege of Rhodes in 1522. After defending the island against the Ottoman Empire for 6 months, they were eventually forced to surrender. However, their valour and tenacity earned them the respect of their enemies, who allowed them to withdraw honourably. The Hospitallers relocated to Malta, where they continued their mission and became known as the Knights of Malta. They played a crucial role in the naval battle of Lepanto in 1571, helping to defeat the Ottoman fleet. The Teutonic Knights, founded in 1190 during the Third Crusade, were initially a hospital brotherhood like the Hospitallers. They quickly evolved into a military order dedicated to both medical care and the expansion of Christendom. The Teutonic Knights wore white mantles with a black cross and were known for their disciplined and austere lifestyle. Their most significant impact was in the Baltic region, where they embarked on a series of military campaigns known as the Northern Crusades. These campaigns aimed to convert the pagan populations of Prussia, Livonia, and Lithuania to Christianity. The Teutonic Knights established a powerful state, building formidable castles such as Marienburg, which served as their headquarters. Imagine the imposing sight of Marienburg Castle, its massive stone walls rising above the surrounding landscape. Within its fortified halls, Teutonic knights gather around long wooden tables, planning their next campaign. The air is filled with a sense of purpose and duty, as these knights prepare to spread the Christian faith through both diplomacy and force. Despite their successes, the Teutonic Knights eventually faced decline. Their harsh methods and territorial ambitions led to conflicts with neighbouring Christian states. The Battle of Grunwald in 1410, where the Polish-Lithuanian forces dealt a crushing blow to the Teutonic Knights, marked the beginning of their downfall. By the late 16th century, the order had lost much of its power and influence. The knightly orders represented a unique fusion of religious devotion and military discipline. The Templars, Hospitallers, and Teutonic Knights each embodied the chivalric ideals in different ways, contributing to the defence and expansion of Christendom. The 100 Years' War, spanning from 1337 to 1453, was a protracted and brutal conflict that fundamentally transformed medieval knighthood. This series of wars between England and France not only altered the course of European history, but also marked the decline of the traditional knightly class and the rise of new military tactics and technologies. The roots of the 100 Years' War lay in a complex web of dynastic disputes and feudal allegiances. The immediate cause was a claim to the French throne by the English king Edward III. When the last Capetian king of France died without a male heir, Edward asserted his right to the throne through his mother, Isabella of France, creating a pretext for a conflict that would span generations. Imagine the grand halls of Windsor Castle, where King Edward gathers his nobles and knights. The flickering light of torches illuminates the faces of battle. Hardened men as Edward, a figure of regal authority, outlines his claim to the French crown. The knights, their armour gleaming in the firelight, listen intently, their hearts stirring with the promise of glory and riches. The early phase of the war saw a series of stunning English victories, largely due to the innovative use of the longbow. At the Battle of Crecy in 1346, the English army, composed mainly of longbowmen, decimated the much larger French force. The longbow, with its range and rapid rate of fire, proved devastating against the heavily armoured French knights. Visualize the battlefield at Crecy, a sea of English longbowmen, their bows drawn, waiting in tense silence. The air is thick with anticipation as the French knights, resplendent in their armour, charge across the field. Suddenly, a hail of arrows darkens the sky, striking down horses and men alike. The sound of arrows piercing metal and flesh fills the air, a grim symphony of death. The Battle of Poitiers in 1356 further cemented the effectiveness of the English tactics. Edward, the Black Prince, led his troops to another decisive victory, capturing the French king, John II. The image of the captured king, held for ransom, symbolized the shifting power dynamics of the period. Despite these early successes, the war was far from one-sided. The French, under leaders like Bertrand du Guesclin, adapted their strategies, employing guerrilla tactics and fortifications to counter the English advances. The protracted conflict saw periods of uneasy truces and renewed hostilities, with both sides enduring devastating losses. One of the most dramatic and iconic episodes of the 100 Years' War was the emergence of Joan of Arc. In 1429, this young peasant girl, claiming divine guidance, inspired the French troops and led them to a series of victories, including the lifting of the siege of Orleans. Joan's presence on the battlefield was both mystical and magnetic, embodying a divine sense of mission. Imagine Joan, clad in white armour, her banner held high, leading the charge against the English. Her voice, clear and commanding, cuts through the chaos of battle, rallying the demoralized French troops. The tide of battle turns as her mere presence inspires a fervent, almost fanatical, courage among the soldiers. Joan's capture and subsequent trial by the English culminated in her execution by burning in 1431. Yet her martyrdom only strengthened the resolve of the French, who saw her as a symbol of divine favour and national unity. The war continued, with the French gradually reclaiming their territory. The final phase of the 100 Years' War saw the rise of new military technologies and tactics that rendered the traditional knightly warfare obsolete. The use of gunpowder and cannons transformed sieges and battles, reducing the effectiveness of heavily armoured knights. The Battle of Castilian in 1453, often considered the last battle of the war, highlighted these changes. French artillery decimated the English forces, signalling the end of English ambitions in France. Picture the thunderous roar of cannons on the battlefield at Castellon. The ground shakes as cannonballs smash through walls and ranks of soldiers. The once mighty knights, now vulnerable and outmatched, fall before the relentless advance of gunpowder weaponry. The age of chivalry gives way to the age of gunpowder, marking a profound shift in the nature of warfare. The 100 Years' War had far-reaching consequences for both England and France. It devastated large swathes of territory, drained treasuries, and led to significant social and political changes. For the knightly class, the war was a turning point. The rise of professional armies and new military technologies diminished the role of the traditional knight, paving the way for a more modern form of warfare. The 100 Years' War was a transformative period that reshaped the medieval world. It marked the decline of the knightly class, the rise of new military innovations, and the emergence of strong national identities. The war's legacy is a testament to the relentless march of history, where even the mightiest warriors must eventually yield to the forces of change. As the medieval period drew to a close, the institution of knighthood faced profound changes that ultimately led to its decline. The rise of professional armies, the advent of gunpowder, and shifting social and economic landscapes all contributed to the transformation of the knight from a dominant warrior class to a more ceremonial role. One of the key factors in the decline of knighthood was the evolution of military technology. The introduction of gunpowder and firearms revolutionized warfare. Cannons and muskets rendered the once impenetrable armor of knights obsolete. Heavy cavalry charges, which had been the decisive force on the battlefield for centuries, were now vulnerable to well-positioned artillery and disciplined infantry, armed with pikes and guns. Imagine a battlefield in the late 15th century, shrouded in smoke and the deafening roar of cannons. Knights in their gleaming armour, symbols of an age, old martial tradition, charge valiantly towards enemy lines. But instead of meeting the clash of swords and lances, they are met with the devastating impact of cannonballs and musket fire. The armour that once protected them now becomes a liability, trapping them in a storm of deadly projectiles. The Battle of Castile in 1453, marking the end of the 100 Years' War, exemplified this shift. The French forces, using cannons, strategically decimated the English troops. The era of the armoured knight as the dominant force in battle was drawing to a close, replaced by new tactics and technologies that emphasized mobility, firepower, and disciplined formations. Another significant factor was the changing social and economic environment. The rise of centralized monarchies reduced the power of the feudal lords who had traditionally maintained private armies of knights. Monarchs like Henry VIII of England and Louis XI of France established professional standing armies funded by taxes rather than feudal levies. These armies were more reliable and could be kept under tighter control than the often unruly feudal levies. Picture the grand halls of the newly centralized royal courts, where kings and their advisers discuss the logistics of maintaining a standing army. The flickering light of chandeliers illuminates maps and military plans spread across large wooden tables. The king's ministers argue for the efficiency and control offered by professional soldiers, marking a shift from reliance on the feudal system and its knightly warriors. Economic changes also played a role in the decline of knighthood. The growth of commerce and the rise of a wealthy merchant class altered the social fabric of Europe. Knights, once primarily landholders and warriors, found themselves needing to adapt to a society where wealth and influence were increasingly determined by trade and finance rather than martial prowess. The Burgundian Wars of the late 15th century showcased this transition. The Swiss infantry, composed largely of peasants and townsfolk, defeated the heavily armoured Burgundian knights at battles such as Grandson and Morat. These victories demonstrated the effectiveness of well-trained infantry and signalled the decline of the traditional knightly class. Amid these changes, the role of the knight became more ceremonial. Tournaments continued to be popular, but they were now more about pageantry and spectacle than martial training. The chivalric ideals persisted in literature and courtly behaviour, but the practical role of the knight as a warrior was diminishing. Imagine a grand tournament in the twilight of the medieval period, filled with the colourful banners and excited crowds. Knights in elaborate armour engage in jousts, their actions more a display of skill and tradition than preparation for war. The cheers of the spectators echo through the arena, a testament to the enduring allure of the knightly image even as its practical significance fades. The transformation of knighthood also had cultural implications. The Renaissance, with its emphasis on humanism and individual achievement, further eroded the collective martial ethos of the medieval knight. The warrior class that had dominated the Middle Ages gradually gave way to new ideals and professions that valued education, diplomacy, and innovation. The decline of knighthood was a multifaceted process influenced by technological advancements, economic changes, and social evolution. The armoured knight, once the epitome of martial prowess and chivalric virtue, became a symbol of a bygone era. Yet the legacy of knighthood endured in the cultural memory, embodied in the romantic literature and historical traditions that continue to celebrate the ideals of honour, bravery, and noble service. As we look back on the Age of Knights, we see a complex and dynamic period where ideals and realities often clashed. The story of medieval knighthood is not just one of glory and valour, but also of adaptation and transformation. The knights, with their blend of chivalry and brutality, remain a testament to the rich and intricate tapestry of medieval history. Thank you for joining us on this enchanting journey through medieval history. While our weekly episodes will continue to captivate your imagination, there's an exclusive treasure trove for subscribers, a secret vault of bonus episodes filled with extra tales and deep dives into the subjects we cover. Your curiosity fuels our mission, and we're truly thankful for your support. Until we meet again among stone walls and towering turrets, keep that torch of curiosity burning bright. Thank you for listening.